Good afternoon. This is Doug Cluck from NOAA in Kansas City. Today we're going to hear from Mike Hayes, who is a professor at School of Natural Resources at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, and he is an author for the chapter that we're going to be focusing on today for the Northern Plains. Martha Shulsky also did quite a bit on this. She was the original presenter for this, but got called away. But she worked with Mike on this slideshow, so she's the Nebraska State climatologist as well. I also want to mention that we're going to have two more of these geographically focused, if you will, National Climate Assessment talks, and they will be focused on the Midwest and the Great Lakes. And hopefully you saw the email about that. I don't know. I guess I sent a reminder out yesterday. I forgot the dates on that. I will tell you in just a second. So obviously today is the 26th, and we're going to focus on the Northern Great Plains. And then on March 11th, we will do an area, the Midwest region, to the east of the Great Plains, actually, and then a focus on the Great Lakes themselves, basin, pretty much, on March 18th at 1 p.m. And all of those are open for the public, and anybody can get on them. Mike will probably go into a little more detail about what the National Climate Assessment is, so I won't take a lot of time on that. But if you have questions about this or anything else you have seen in the report, feel free to type them in. There's a place on your little bar there to go and ask or to write in questions, type in questions. Or at the end, raise your hand or whatever you would like to do, and just go ahead and comment or ask your questions at the very end. Either way, we'll take them after Mike is finished. So, Mike, what have I forgotten? Anything?
You were going to mention that it's being taped and they might be able to get it later as well.
That's a good point. Yeah, we're going to record this, and I don't have a place at the moment to put it, but we'll work to get it up, and then I'll send an email out about where that is so others can listen to it. So, yeah, I guess without any further ado, Mike, one of the authors of the Northern Great Plains chapter of this particular report that came out the day after Thanksgiving last year, take it away.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me well and see the screen that has the title slide on there with my name and also Martha Shulsky's name on there. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity today to talk to you about the Northern Great Plains chapter of the 4th National Climate Assessment. As Doug said, there'll be other webinars for the Midwest and the Great Lakes. And I wanted to, as Doug did, acknowledge Martha Shulsky on this presentation. She's not able to be here today, but she did put together many of these slides. And I also want to mention that she continues to give multiple presentations on the NCA4 and is a tremendous spokesperson for this topic, which I will highlight at the end of my presentation. So my plan is to take about 30 minutes to go through some slides on the chapter and then open it up for questions and discussion. And I know that several of you on the webinar have also been involved in the NCA4 process. So just a reminder, this overview is from my perspective, but you might also have your own insights to add as we go on or during the question period. So with that, let me go to the next slide. Yeah, so hopefully slide 2 is up there for you all. The 4th National Climate Assessment comes out of a process that actually began with the Global Change Research Act in 1990. Out of this act, the United States Global Change Research Program was created, which now has 13 federal departments, agencies, and the Executive Office of the President involved in this program. The goals of the act were, as you can see on the slide, to provide for development and coordination of a comprehensive and integrated United States research program to understand, assist, predict, and respond to human-induced and natural processes of global change. So the act also was given the charge of preparing a national climate assessment for the President and Congress every 4 years. So there has been a national climate assessment in 2000, 2009, 2014, and this last one that was released in November in 2018. For me, one of the things that I like to emphasize is that it's really the process that makes this whole program or the National Climate Assessment process so valuable. And this process has evolved with time. So in this next slide, for this round of the process, organizers decided that a 2-volume approach would be strategic. So volume 1 on the left was the Climate Science Special Report that was released in November 2017. And then volume 2 on the right with the focus on the impacts, risks, and adaptation in the United States that was released in November 2018. So I like to show this slide for volume 1, the Climate Science Special Report, because it gives illustration of the process that each of these volumes went through before they ended up being released. For example, the special report, the process for it began in early 2015, 32 authors, many references, and a 6-step review process. Similarly, I like to show this slide for volume 2, the volume that was released November 23rd, 2018. More than 300 authors, 6,000 unique references, an 8-step review process, covers 10 regions, and covers 15 sectors and national topics. So I sometimes wonder if people really appreciate the scale of the process that took place in this National Climate Assessment, 4th National Climate Assessment process. And I just like to emphasize that because it's one that really inspires me and was one of the reasons why I enjoyed my involvement being in part of the National Climate Assessment process. So there are some differences that Volume 2 of the NCA 4 had that were different from NCA 3. For example, in this climate assessment, there was more focus given on regional chapters. And part of that was that the Great Plains in NCA 3 was split into a Northern Great Plains chapter and a Southern Great Plains chapter. So that was a significant difference in development. There was also a chapter on the U.S. Caribbean, on air quality, on U.S. international interests, and then sector interactions, multiple stressors, and complex systems. So these were the additions or the changes that are part of NCA 4. And to show the regions that were in NCA 4, this slide here has the different regions, and you can see that the Northern Great Plains and the Southern Great Plains have been split into 2 different chapters, which I think was a very wise and smart move by the organizers. You also see where the Midwest location is for the Midwest chapter. That discussion will be coming up in a few weeks. So as an introduction to the NCA 4 Volume 2, some of these slides, if you go on to the NCA 4 website, some of these slides are available for people to put into presentations. So this is one of the slides that has come out of that, giving this overview. The Earth's climate is now changing faster than at any point in modern civilization. These changes are primarily the result of human activities, and the impacts of climate change are already being felt across the country, and Americans are responding. I like that last point because it's one of the emphases that the NCA 4 tried to address within the report is what are some of the examples of adaptation strategies and steps that people are taking to deal with the climate change issue. Neither global efforts to mitigate the causes nor regional efforts to adapt currently approach the scales that are needed to face this issue. The scenarios that are used in NCA 4, there is a high scenario, RCP 8.5. There's a lower scenario, RCP 4.5, and then there's an RCP 2.6 scenario. So on this graphic showing global average temperature change, there's an observed curve and then these different scenarios that project global average temperature change out to 2100. The reason why the higher scenario and the lower scenario are circled in orange is to emphasize that in the next few slides, I'll show some examples highlighting the Northern Great Plains, and it will be for these two scenarios, the RCP 8.5 scenario and the RCP 4.5 scenario. So in this next slide, this is showing the projected changes in U.S. annual average temperature for the middle of the 21st century. On the left, upper left, there is the lower scenario, RCP 4.5, and on the right, the higher scenario, RCP 8.5. And for the Northern Great Plains, the increase is 3 degrees in the lower scenario and 4 degrees in the higher scenario. And if we go out to the end of the 21st century, that temperature change, projected change, is now 4 to 5 degrees in the Northern Great Plains in the lower scenario and 8 degrees in the higher scenario in the lower right. So this is great context for the Northern Great Plains. This next slide shows the projected changes in the number of days above 90 degrees. This first map is by the mid-21st century in the RCP 8.5 scenario. And they're going to be estimated 20 to 40 more days above 90 degrees in the Northern Great Plains region. And likewise, for days below 32 by the mid-century in this higher scenario, 20 to 40 fewer days below 32 in the Northern Great Plains. In this slide, by the late 21st century, so the end of the century, in the higher scenario, showing winter and spring precipitation for the country, but if you focus on the Northern Great Plains, about 10 to 20% more precipitation in the Northern Great Plains. The red dots are areas where the changes are large compared to natural variations, and then the hatched areas are where the changes are small and relatively insignificant. So that's winter and spring. And this next slide, or this next edition, these two maps are summer and fall. And so you can see that this winter and spring months, there's stronger agreement that they'll be wetter by the end of the 21st century, and maybe a slight tendency toward drier, but not as big of a change in the summer and fall months in the northern Great Plains. And then this next slide is showing how the heaviest 1% events of precipitation, how they are changing their component or their makeup in total annual precipitation for the northern Great Plains. So on the left, the lower scenario, it's a 10 to 20% increase in these heaviest 1% of events. And on the right, in the higher scenario, it's a 10 to 40% increase for the northern Great Plains. So those are some overview slides. These next slides get into the chapter itself. And I like this slide. This is a figure that opens up the Northern Great Plains chapter. And it's one that I helped put together and spent quite a bit of time putting together. It shows 8 different mini case studies of impacts that climate change is having in the Northern Great Plains, and what are some of the responses that are taking place. So it gets back at this this idea that Americans are responding to this issue of climate change. So I think this overall figure itself was a really important addition and component of the Northern Great Plains chapter. And if you go to the website, you can click on each of the mini case studies and get some additional information about those case studies. The Northern Great Plains, so backing up a step, each chapter, each region chapter had some key message themes. And so for the Northern Great Plains chapter, the key message themes that were identified by the group of authors revolved around water, agriculture, recreation and tourism, energy, and indigenous communities. Those were the key themes. So under key message 1, water, the chapter authors spent a lot of time talking about water in the Northern Great Plains as we were developing the chapter. Because water is so critical in the Northern Great Plains, any changes that occur, even small changes, are going to have considerable impacts. And another factor that we tried to highlight within the chapter is how increasing variability, whether climate, water resources across the region, is going to have a big impact as it relates to water and the livelihoods and ecosystems of the people and nature in the Northern Great Plains. So we tried to address that with this key message on water. And one of the figures that tries to demonstrate this point is this figure here, which is showing March snow water equivalent. On the left, a historical amount of snow water equivalent from 1976 to 2005. And then on the right, a change in that snow water equivalent by the mid-21st century using the higher scenario. And certainly snowpack is a big issue. Again, this variability across the Northern Great Plains as it relates to water was one of the things that we tried to point out. And this is one illustration where maybe that is an important component. Key message number 2 on agriculture. Agriculture is integral in the northern Great Plains. So rising temperatures and extreme weather events, water are likely to have an impact and maybe a negative impact on parts of the region. And so adaptation is going to be very important in terms of management. And there are going to be shifts in agricultural practices and enterprises. So one of the things that I think other regions around the country tend to forget is just how valuable the northern Great Plains is in terms of agriculture for the rest of the country. So this slide shows the percent of national total of various livestock production totals in the top part of the table, and then crops on the lower tier of the table. So 22% of beef cattle, for example, and 20% of corn for grain comes out of the northern Great Plains. So I think people tend to underestimate the value of the northern Great Plains for agriculture in the U.S. So agricultural impacts. Generally, warmer, wetter, elevated CO2 is going to have a variety of impacts. Increase soil water availability in the north and perhaps decrease it in the south. That's going to be particularly true as you get into the southern Great Plains. Increase extreme high temperatures during pollination and grain fill, potentially reducing crop yields. Weeds, invasive species, crop pests, alteration of plant phenology, earlier onset of spring, which we're seeing scientific papers come out verifying that, and then decreased quality of forage would be another agricultural impact. Recreation and tourism. This is another message that the authors talked about. We wanted to highlight this because we think that this sector is unique in the northern Great Plains. There's some great ecosystem services in the region that provide these recreational opportunities that we wanted to highlight and how they might be potentially at risk. And so this involves land use changes with agriculture, for example, particularly with wetlands. I'll show that in the next slide. And how various organizations are doing quite a bit. Again, Americans are responding. So these organizations are doing quite a bit in preparedness and adaptation activities, such as scenario planning, transboundary collaboration, and the development of market-based tools. So this slide showing some of the recent reductions in grassland area in the prairie pothole region of the northern Great Plains, which is outlined by that heavy black line across the north central part of the region. And in the orange to brown colors is the conversion from grassland to a corn soybean cropping system by percent for that region between 2006 and 2011. So this agriculture, recreation, tourism interaction is a key one that we wanted to highlight in this chapter for the Northern Great Plains. Key message number 4 is about energy. It's a topic I don't know that much about. Fossil fuel and renewable energy production and distribution infrastructure is expanding in the region, but climate change can put this infrastructure at risk. And the energy sector is also a significant source of gases that contribute to climate change and ground level ozone pollution. This is a good point to say that each of these chapters connects with some of the other chapters, including some of the sector-related chapters. So there's a good connection between the Northern Great Plains chapter and the energy chapter, for example, in the NCA 4. So this next slide related to energy just is illustrating how flooding can have an impact. This is a picture of flooding at Fort Calhoun, the nuclear power plant there along the Missouri River in 2011. It's also a great illustration of the variability that we're seeing in the plains, where we had this tremendous year of flooding in 2011, followed by a significant dry year in 2012. So when we talk about variability across the northern Great Plains, we're talking about spatial variability as well as temporal variability, and seeing things change significantly year to year across the region. And then key message 5, the last key message, is on the indigenous peoples of the region. They're at high risk from a variety of climate change impacts. These changes are already resulting in harmful impacts to tribal economies, livelihoods, sacred waters and plants used for ceremonies, medicine, and subsistence as well. But tribes are being very proactive in adaptation and strategic climate change planning. So that's the optimistic part. This slide shows that indigenous peoples are an important part of the Northern Great Plains region, and we definitely wanted to highlight that and emphasize that within the chapter. So a couple of parting thoughts, and actually Martha Shulsky put these mostly together for us. So there are thoughts, not those of the NCA. Climate change, it's already here. We're the cause, but we're also the solution. So that was emphasized in the whole report and also in the chapter. The sooner we act, the less risky it is. They're great examples to follow. You see that in some parts of our chapter, but also throughout the whole NCA4 report. The report only scratches the surface in terms of impacts and issues, but serves as an excellent reference point. And just to add to that, we talked about other topics to include as key messages within the Northern Great Plains chapter. For example, public health impacts. And we decided, there's just at this time, there's only so much to emphasize. And so maybe in the future reports for the NCA, some of these other topics will come out. The NCA is a great benchmark to continue or propel the dialogue, and we're definitely seeing that. Finally, all climate impacts are local, so know your local or regional climatologist. And to emphasize that point, I want to mention a few things that the Nebraska State Climate Office does. This would be what Martha Shulsky is the director for the State Climate Office in Nebraska. For example, they are putting together graphics that definitely complement what comes out of the National Climate Assessment Report. This is showing annual average temperature changes for Nebraska. On the left is from 1895 to 2016, and on the right is 1986 to 2015. So these state level graphics can be very beneficial in helping to illustrate some points. Here's one that shows annual precipitation trends. On the left, again, the long-term rate of change, and on the right, a short-term rate of change from 1986 to 2015. I know the State Climate Office here in Nebraska is putting together some other graphics to look at some other different variables and trends. Also, one thing Martha does when she gives talks on climate change or the NCA4 report, she'll try to highlight some of the effects that Nebraska's changing climate might have on livelihoods and ecosystems, and then what those changes, the impacts those effects might have. So a longer growing season might be an effect, whereas more evaporative demand is going to be a potential impact from that. So as I mentioned before, she does a great job in going out and communicating these issues to stakeholders across the state of Nebraska. And to emphasize that point, Martha and Nebraska Extension are going to be hosting a Nebraska Climate Summit on March 21st at Innovation Campus here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And so certainly some of the outputs from NCA4 will be discussed during this climate summit, as well as other aspects of how climate is affecting stakeholders across the state of Nebraska. So I just want to mention the chapter author team for the Northern Great Plains chapter. It was a great team to be involved with. I definitely enjoyed interacting with all of these authors and learned so much from all of them, and appreciate the contributions that all of them made to the chapter. So Doug and Rich Conant were definitely the leads for the chapter and did a great job with that. I also want to acknowledge the USGCRP coordinators, Elisa Lustig and Kristen Lewis, did a great job in helping us through this process that, as I mentioned earlier, was a remarkable process to be a part of. So I think this last slide is just a slide that gives the chapter citation and where you can find this chapter on the website at nca2018.globalchange.gov. The website does a great job with all the chapters and providing the information for the full NCA4 report. So, Doug, that's all I had for right now.
Okay. Thank you very much,
I'll stop and
Mike.
we can have some questions.
You bet. Thank you so much. Just a couple more things to add to Mike's presentation is that if you go online and you want to read the chapter, or even if you want to download a PowerPoint similar to what Mike provided you, it won't be the same, but it'll be more focused, a little more focused without the maybe a few other things that Mike threw in there from some of the other chapters on the Northern Great Plains. So you can download the entire presentation and or most of this presentation, but you can also download like agriculture or water resources or any of the other chapters that are available. There's a whole
and all of the graphics, Doug.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, all the graphics are up there as well. So
right. So if you're thinking about or someone has tabbed you to give a presentation on this subject, there's plenty of information online to help you at least get started. I'd highly advise tweaking it to your own needs, though. I think we do have okay. This is a good question. And Jennifer Walker asks, is there a way to get a hard copy book of the report? And Jennifer, yes, you can go online to this place, and you might have to look around a little bit, but it's there where you can request a or some copies. There's a couple different versions of it. You know, if you just want the scientific report, you can get that. If you want sort of the multi-chapter geographic and sector book, volume 2, in other words, you can get that. And then there's a couple different sizes of that. So I have a bunch of overview ones, for example, which are 20 pages, which really doesn't do it justice, but it's an overview, right? So those are available, and you can order those online. And there were a couple more things I wanted to say because people I always find it sort of interesting, Mike, to show the precipitation and temperature sort of. They're not outlooks; these are scenarios. And if you back up to those again,
sure.
Because one of the key issues that people always want to know, and various, how can I use this information? How could it possibly be of use now? How do I plan with this stuff? We're not going to get into all of that on this phone call, but I'm going to give you an aspect, and maybe Mike can help me talk about it a little bit. About let's just stop there for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
If we continue to warm like the models are saying we may, either case, we're going to have a lot more evaporation, especially in the warm season. Evapotranspiration, if there's plants growing, crops growing, that kind of thing, or even grasslands, there's going to be more. But we also saw from some of these maps that there's more precipitation happening in certain seasons. The high plains are in sort of a position between, if you will, sort of drier western and southwestern parts of the country, and it looks like on here where there's more green and such, green colored gradations, wetter conditions to the north and maybe even northeast a little bit. So often the question is the temperature going to override any additional precipitation that we might realize in the winter and or spring? In other words, if summers are much drier and so much hotter, does it really matter if we get some more precipitation in winter and spring? And I don't know if there's a perfect answer to that, but Mike, what would you say? Or what kind of considerations might you bring up in that?
So I think that's a really good question, and sometimes maps like these, when you just look at these, they don't give justice to that question, because what is average temperature and what is average winter precipitation? So what I would say is timing is going to be very important, and how timing changes. So a lot of the management activities that are done, if you just think about agriculture, change during the various seasons. So the timing of when it'll be wetter and warmer versus just maybe drier is going to be very important. So I think it's a tough message to give, Doug.
It is.
So I don't know if I answered your question really well.
Well, I think the thing is that the potential is there for wetter conditions, and we're seeing them on these precipitation maps, right?
Yes, and if you go ahead.
I was going to say, where you see the red dots, there's more agreement in the models that it's
Yeah.
going to be that way.
Yeah.
So there's more confidence that there's going to be a relatively, there's going to be more precipitation in those areas during those seasons. Where you see the hatched lines, there's much less agreement. Or is it, let's see, what's it say? It's not less agreement necessarily. It's just that the change in precipitation won't necessarily be immense. I think that is the point
Right.
there. Small and relatively insignificant
Right.
changes.
Right.
So,
and I think you also saw when I showed those statewide maps for Nebraska, it is showing that it is getting wetter in Nebraska. And I know the State Climate Office for Nebraska is breaking that down by season as well. So they'll have some maps by season. And so that might show some interesting patterns. And similarly, there might be good patterns for South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, and so forth. Mm-hmm.
Right. And let's also mention that these outlooks are for, the mid-century and late century.
Yeah, this one's late century, this one. Mm-hmm.
Right. But we're already seeing some of these aspects materialize now in terms of minimum temperatures, for example, being warmer than they were in the past, especially, I know you can't tell it this winter, but during the wintertime season. So we're having what I've been calling a real winter this year in the northern plains, certainly since late January. Yeah, that's about when it flipped. So we do have a question from Nancy Gardere that says, which of the two scenarios most resembles business as usual, and how closely does that track? So you might go back, Mike, to the earlier slides where you have the two scenarios kind of etched. Yeah, graphed.
Do you want to?
Go ahead.
You can talk about this one.
Okay. Well, so again, this is up for debate and hypothesis, but there's some fear that we're not even tracking. So the business as usual is the orange line. That's without really adjusting, trapping, mitigating CO2. or even reducing emissions. That's without reducing emissions. It's sort of like, okay, let's just not worry about it, go about our lives. Well, the fear and the hypothesis is that the model probably doesn't take into account the real reality of what could happen, right? So it could be worse than this. So the orange line is business as usual. The blue line is curbing CO2 levels, and to be honest, I don't know what level, but I think, and the green line is, if we would just stop CO2 emissions somehow at a blink of an eye, for the most part. So that's sort of the answer to that question.
Mm-hmm.
Kristen did send a link to the Global Change / browse reports. Yeah. If you want to get more information, if you want to download the, if you want to order reports, I'm sorry, you put a /browse/reports after globalchange.gov. I'm trying to put that in a place that we can all see that, so stand by. I can't copy it very well for some reason. Here, let me just react. Maybe if I just react and send it to all, everybody can see it. Can you see somewhere in the thing that what Kristen sent me in terms of the question?
Yes.
And you see the link there, Mike?
Yes. Yep, both are there.
Yeah.
I
so
can
if
see
you want to order, okay, good. If you want to see or if you want to order reports, you can do it at that website. Any other questions? I can open this up more broadly if people have any other issues or questions. Okay. Oh, yeah. Jennifer's asking, and since Kristen's on here, she's saying that you can get a free copy of the overview or report in brief, but not the full report. I know you can get a PDF version, of course, Jennifer. Kristen, is it possible? Kristen, I'm going to unmute you so you can just talk. You're unmuted, Kristen.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So you can order printed materials of the report and brief or overview, as you mentioned, Doug. And unfortunately, we are not printing the full report, as that is over 1,500 pages. But you can get the PDF and print the materials that you would like. You can also get each PDF by chapter. So if you're only interested in the Northern Great Plains chapter, you can download that and print that yourself as well.
Yeah. Yeah, 1,500 pages for everybody would be a lot of dead trees. I guess it's carbon capture in a way.
Yeah,
anyway.
Even the shipping costs would be a little bit much.
Right. Mary, I'm going to unmute you now. Hi, Mary. Mary Baker.
Hey, Doug. I just want to tell you guys thanks.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Mary.
All right. Well, you know how to contact us. Mike, if you have any questions about this, any of the materials, this is what we do for a living. We talk about this stuff. So it's part of what we do, I should say. So let us know. If you want a forecast, I'll give you that too. It's going to be cold and stay that way for the next 2 weeks. I say that laughingly. I know a lot of people are tired of it, but I'm afraid it's true. So
it's just going to make spring. It's going to make spring so much nicer. Yeah.
So thank you all very much. And again, if anybody has any further questions, you know how to get a hold of us. I hope you always have my email one way or the other. Thank you, Adnan. Nice to talk to you too. and thank you everybody else. Bye-bye.